It's Mazzy, and let's talk jazz. I've said this countless times on my channel that we're in a golden era of jazz reissues, releases, archival recordings, as well as new music. But for this video, I want to show some fairly new jazz reissues and archival releases. Now, some of them have been released over the last several months from Tone Poet and Blue Note. There is a wonderful, I'm just orgasmic box from Kraft Records. And I do want to open up with a series of a preview of some jazz record store day releases. These were sent to me by Zev Feldman and a variety of labels that Zev has been working with. Now, those of you who know Zev Feldman, you know he is like the jazz, literally, he's the jazz detective. Where Joe Hartley is the tone poet, Zev Feldman is the jazz detective. And last record store day, I had a conversation on this channel with Zev. We're gonna have another one. We're doing another one on April 11th, I believe. And it should be up by later that day or by the following morning, the 12th of April. And I wanna talk about these releases with Zev in April. But right now I wanna give you a little preview. Again, out of this batch, these were generously sent to me. I have spent the last 2 weeks listening to them in a kind of a deep dive. And I'm gonna give you an overview, and when I talk to Zev in a couple of weeks, I wanna get information of him and how he compiled these and the trials and tribulations and just the discovery of finding these tapes through a series and a collection of relationships and people he's worked with all these labels. So I'm gonna start out with 2 records right off the bat that are on the Jazz Detective label, and that's Zev's label, his moniker, and I'm gonna open up with Chet Baker, Blue Room. He's issued a number of Chet Bakers for Record Store Day over the last several years for Resonance Records and I think Elemental possibly. And I'm all confused here, so Zev's gonna have to help me when we talk about who's who and what's what with these various labels. But this was the first one I got, and I am a huge Chet Baker fan. We all know that the most anticipated repress in the Tone Poet series is Chet Baker Sings. And people who don't have that record and didn't get it the first time around have been waiting with bated breath for that to come out. This is from a 1979 studio sessions that were out of the Netherlands, out of Holland, at the Vera Studios in Hilversum in the Netherlands. That's the studio here, and apparently this building over to the left, that's the specific studio that this is recorded in 1979. This is 9 years prior to the death of Chet Baker. I'm in awe on Chet Baker. I love his 50s solo trumpet playing and his trios and the various incarnations and projects he's worked on. I like his vocals. Now, his vocals aren't for everyone, but I think he's got one of the most beautiful, organic, just late night ethereal sounds, and I'm a huge, huge fan. I think I got into him a lot even more in the late 80s, just before he died in the movie Let's Get Lost, that documentary that photographer Bruce Weber did. And that was, I believe, just in the last several years of his life that was recorded. But these are studio sessions. These sound brilliant. These are beautiful recordings. And I would say there are several vocals. I think the majority of it is the band. There are 2 different sessions he did in 1979. First, on April 10th, 1979, with Phil Markowitz on piano, an American piano player, Jean-Louis Renafosse on bass, there's my French for you, and Charles Rice on drums. Later, 6 months later or so, he returns to the studio and works with Franz Elson, Victor Kaihatu, and Eric Ineki. What's really wonderful about these sets that Zev works in, they're really deep dive, they're archaeological digs. He scours the world for these recordings live and studio tapes, and brings them for us and puts them out on usually Record Store Day. There is a CD counterpart apparently, so if you're a compact disc version, you can look for that as well. So I'm a big fan of this. Here's the gatefold, and of course he does quality label and polyline sleeves. All the jazz freaks are wanting polyline sleeves these days, and I guess you yell out and these reissue labels listen to them for the most part. But I'm a big fan of this so far, so I want to thank you. We will dive deeper when I discuss this release with Zev in a couple of weeks, so we can get more into the nitty-gritty of the recordings and the tapes and the process of bringing it together. Next, also on the Jazz Detective, is Sonny Stitt Boppin at the Biltmore. Now, I am a huge, massive fan of Charlie Parker. To me, no one better. He's my all-time favorite jazz artist. Sonny Stitt really kind of emulates the Charlie Parker, was very influenced by Charlie Parker. There's a great bebop sound to this. This is a Boppin record. Literally, it says Boppin at the Baltimore Live at the Left Bank. These are recordings from 1973 in Baltimore, Maryland. Again, this was co-produced released by Zev Feldman with Corey Weeds. And this is a smoking record as well. Again, well recorded. There's a lovely, lovely book talking about obviously the story of these recordings, a little bio on Sonny Stitt. There's discussions of the venue, the Left Bank, and Sonny Stitt at the Left Bank, and they go through all the other musicians with various essays. And that's what's great about these records. You're not just putting the music out there with no background or no information, because again, these are unreleased tapes that have never seen the light of day until now. So the next one, there's a copy of these tapes again from the original tapes there. These are numbered. This is 2500 pressings. This is number 1516. Again, Sonny Stitt, Boppin at the Biltmore. A very, very drive-in series of dates there. Another one of my favorite jazz artists, possibly my favorite jazz pianist, is Bill Evans. And I know Zev has worked on several Bill Evans projects. There seems to be a Bill Evans release every single one. And people, are questioning, want to make sure, is this a good recording? Is this a bad recording? Is this an archival recording? Where it should be about the performance first, but sometimes people want to know, and so hopefully this preview will give you a sense. Well, first of all, this is a fantastic recording, okay? This is from 1965, I believe it's 1965, 66, and 1969 in Denmark. And I tell you, this blew me away, but the part of it that blew me away the most for my personal taste, and maybe it's not for everyone in the jazz world, but let me go through it first. LP1, Bill Evans Trio, Denmark, 1965. Bill Evans, Neil Henning, Ørsted Pedersen, who's been in a lot of, I remember ECM records. I got into him in the 1970s. Alan Dawson on drums and Alex Reel on drums on some of the tracks as well. And then LP2, Bill Evans solo with the Orchestra Denmark in 1965 and 69. Now, that was a sweet spot for me. I'll return to that in one moment. LP3, Bill Evans Trio Denmark, 66 and 69. You get this wonderful photograph there. But the orchestra opens up with sort of an interlude of, actually on side 2, there's an interlude of an intro into, and it flows into Waltz for Debbie. Definitely one of Bill Evans' most famous tracks. The A side of that is Bill Evans' solo piano, which is just stunningly beautiful, really wonderful. But I really like this orchestration. And it goes through a series of 3 tracks, Time Remembered, My Bells, Treasures, and ends up with a reprise of Waltz for Debbie. And the orchestration is just really lovely. I really like that lush arrangements. And this is a fantastic record. And this, again, the solo piano, the trio work, So this is one I highly recommend, and this has been on my turntable. Listen to Chet Baker. I mean, there's a mood to these two records, and what's great about this, the Sonny Stitt goes in a different direction. The Bill Evans and the Chet Baker go in another direction, a more intimate direction. But as intimate as this is, there's a magnificent beauty to it as well. And this is really a sweet spot in the 1960s of mid-60s to late 60s of Bill Evans. Love this album. This is a limited edition of 7,550 copies. Bill Evans, Record Store Day, coming this April. Next is Eric Dolphy. This is a mother of a set. This is a 3 LP set, and this is Eric Dolphy's Musical Prophet, the expanded 1963 New York studio sessions. Now, this originally came out in this form in 2018 for Record Store Day. This was a limited edition of 3,000 copies, and this sold out, obviously, and in the resale market has been going for, somewhat semi-crazy money. And there's been a demand for this doing a repress. So I'll talk about that in a minute about represses. This is a new version, so as you can see, it's the same music, same record, but they just added a different cover photograph. And now this is an edition of 4,000 copies. This is an amazing album. Again, some of it is avant-garde out there. There's certain solo stuff. Eric Dolphy, of course, I mean, not unlike Ornette Coleman and some of Coltrane work, has some really out there, free-form, free jazz. And there's some solo pieces of music on here that he does with the tenor sax, flute, baritone sax. There's some interesting opening numbers, which is more accessible to begin with. Jitterbug, Waltz, and Music Matador, obviously more Spanish influences, but this is a wild record. This is a cool-ass record. This is a record you really have to, put your mind out there for. It also comes with this wonderful booklet. Check that pork pie hat out, man. Eric Dolphy's so cool. Annotated essays, reviews, historical notations, a fantastic set. So I do know this well, and this is something, in my house, I have to play this pretty much when I'm alone, because it is on the edge, but I think it's on the edge in a real fantastic way. So again, look at the difference there. Collectors collect all of them like baseball cards or something. Now, I know someone out there watching is going to say, what the F, Mazzy? I bought that in 2018 and it's going to dampen the value. Well, if you're buying music for value instead of for music, that's on you. That's on you. I don't like that. But the thing is, editions are of the moment, of the time. I come from the photo world, fine art photography, commercial photography. I can have a photographer that does edition of 100 prints, 11 by 14, signed by the author from the year 2000. In 2005, you can do a separate edition. It could be slightly different. Sometimes it's maybe sepia toned. Sometimes it's split tone or selenium based tone. Sometimes it's a larger, just a 16 by 20 or 20 by 24. That's how editions work. So don't get all your panties in a bunch worrying about the value of your friggin' record from 2018 is going to go down because they're putting it out for people to enjoy. Now, in this case, again, you can collect all the different covers if that's what you want. But again, it's a great record. It's a great sounding record. It has polyline sleeves, all the things that you jazz people want. This is Eric Dolphy on Resonance Records. Zev Feldman's also collaborating again with Corey Weeds out of Canada for Reel to Real, R-E-E-L to R-E-A-L, with this one. Now, this is one that I adore. I love this. This is Walter Bishop Jr., Bish at the Bank, live in Baltimore with Harold Vick, Lou McIntosh, and Dick Burke. He's doing some smoking piano, and he goes in these great jazz runs. Again, with Zev, we'll probably talk a little more about the music. Harold Vick is a really big part of this record. His tenor sax playing and soprano sax and flute again. Walter Bishop Jr. is not known by a lot of people outside the, the real intense jazz world. I got into him, and I wasn't a huge fan of his, but the record that got me into was out of a small label called Black Jazz Records, and this is a reissue Real Gone put out several years ago, and this is Coral Keys. This is a mother of an album. This is, again, the African American experience. This is more soul jazz. Came out of this label out of the East Bay, in the Bay Area, living across the bay from me in San Francisco there. But this is a great album, a whole different feel. Now, going back to this Record Store Day release, Walter Bishop Jr., Bishop the Bank, this sounds amazing too. The piano runs of Walter are really interesting. Again, as I said, the Harold Vicks tenor, soprano, and flute, Lou McIntosh bass, and Dick Burke on drums. Again, another great release. Walter Bishop, Left Bank Jazz Society, a whole journey and education into jazz with these releases that come in these booklets. And Zev has done a really tremendous job with these various other producers and tape archivists, I guess, around the world. So I applaud them. Now, lastly, for Record Store Day, this is coming out. I'm going to segue from this into the next release that's not a Zev Feldman related release. This is Shirley Scott, Queen Talk, live at the Left Bank, George Coleman, Bobby Durham, Ernie Andrews. For whatever reason, these two reel-to-reel releases come in paper sleeves, not polyline sleeves. That's something that we keep criticizing. Remember when the Blue Note 80s and Blue Note Classics didn't come in polyline sleeves and up in arms, and now those, they added that 5, 10, 15 cents to add those. I think they should add these next time there. So that's my only criticism right now off the top. These need to be not in these cheap-ass white sleeves. The pressings are really well done. Again, this is Shirley Scott, Queen Talk, live at the Left Bank. Now, out of all these records I just shown from this series of records for Record Store Day, I will say, I hate to say it, this was a big disappointment for me. I didn't like the sound of the recordings. I first thought my stylus had dust on it. I thought it was thin, it was weak, but I understand archival recordings aren't all amazing fidelity. So, I would have given that a pass. But what I find on most of this record, again, this is a live record from 1972 at the ballroom, the famous ballroom in Baltimore, Maryland. I found that this almost should be billed as a George Coleman record. The organ playing, I'm a huge fan of Shirley Scott. I'm a huge fan of the B3 organ. The organ playing is really tampered down back in the mix, and that's what's on the tape, and they really can't remix that up. Not that Shirley Scott needs to be out in the front, in front of everyone, but she just seems so far back, and in a way, the balance of the sound by George Coleman's tenor saxophone was way too much forward. So we got Bobby Durham on drums, and Ernie Andrews sings on a couple tracks, and I kind of like that. I enjoyed that. But this is my weak link of the Record Store Day, and I was really disappointed with the tapes, and I assume that's how the tapes sound, so you can't really change it and bring more up. I mean, I think they need to do what they did with the Get Back sessions of the Beatles, do the demixing out of New Zealand, Peter Jackson's take, so they can kind of remix this. I know that's way out of the budget and the what am I saying? We're never going to get that. And so if you're a fan of Shirley Scott, I think this is the one release out of this whole collection here in this first section for Record Store Day. There's some great interviews and great essays in here that Zev Feldman speaks with Bobby Durham, the drummer. And there's also a great conversation with Joey DeFrancesco, who is another amazing B3 organist who we just lost in the last couple of years. And I know him too of his later collaborations with Van Morrison. But I love the B3 organ, and I'd say out of all of them, this is the one I just can't quite, get my hands around, and there's a disappointment there in that. But having said that, I am a huge fan of Shirley Scott. There was a 10-year period, I think in 1961 to 71-ish. She was married to the great Stanley Turrentine. They did several albums together, and she's on so many wonderful records. So I really need to segue right into this box set. This is a box set. It's one of my two favorite box sets of the year of 2023 so far, along with the Bob Dylan recent box set. Eddie Lockjaw Davis with Shirley Scott, Cookin' with Jaws and the Queen. Kraft Records. I paid for this. I didn't get it free. This is a mother. This is a soul, jazz, smoking, cooking affair. These great records from the late 1950s into 1960s are just soul jazz classics. I'm a huge fan of the B3 organ, and these are mother effers. This is a smoking series of records. On this one, you got smoking. Literally, it says smoking. That's the title, and it is just that. Obviously, Eddie Lockjaw Davis with Jerome Richardson on flute, tenor, and baritone sax. On the great Hammond B3 organ, you got Shirley Scott. You got George DeViviere on bass and Arthur Edgehill on drums. Opening track, High Fry. You got a great version of Pennies from Heaven, that great, wonderful song. Pots and Pans, It's a Blue World. I mean, again, literally, cooking, smoking is the perfect description for these records, because that's what they're doing. These are great for cocktail records. These are great for party records. These are smoking records. You got Volume 1, Cooking again. Opening up, Half Horn Will Blow. The Chef, But Beautiful. What a great ballad that is. I love that song. You got Volume 2, Cooking again. And each thing they cook on here. Skillet, The Broilers, The Rev. This is fantastic. Eddie Lockjaw and Shirley Scott, of course, and Jerome Richardson. And then you got Volume 3. These are an amazing series of records. This is from 1961, this particular one. Lucky So-and-So, again. Heat and Serve, My Old Flame, Cimarron. Love this set. Again, probably the box set release of the year in jazz so far. You got great essays and great curation that Kraft really does. I'm just in love with this box set as well. So this is something that's available now, not a record store day release, but get it while you can, because these things, go in and out of print. I highly recommend this one. But cooking, smoking, playing. It seems to always start and end with Blue Note Records. Now, Blue Note is not the only jazz label by far, but Blue Note really, the whole thing with Blue Note, going back to Music Matters Jazz and even some of the classic records, and of course, of late, of the Blue Note 80s, the 80th anniversary that morphed into the Blue Note Classics, and of course, the wonderful Joe Harley-led, self-titled Tone Poet series. Just an amazing series of quality, amazing releases by Blue Note Records. Don Was really kind of has been pushing that label in an amazing direction the last decade or so. But I'm going to start out with this. This is a classic series, so it's of great value. It's all analog again, Kevin Gray cut. And this is Speaking My Piece, Horace Parlan Quintet. Horace Parlan has been a favorite of mine for a number of years now. I have several of his records from Music Matters Jazz releases, and I really took a deep dive into his playing and his history. And he had a affliction, a damaging of, I think it's the last two fingers on his right hand, and his piano playing has reflected that. He relearned and learned how to play in a certain a very unique way of his recordings. And this is Speaking My Piece. Of course, it has the Turrentine brothers, Tommy Turrentine on trumpet, the great Stanley on tenor. You got Horace Parlan on piano, George Tucker on bass, and Al Harewood on drums. And I'm always, I love the opening track. I know this album, I knew it before I got the classic series. It's a boppin' record, it's got a great groove to it. Groove is overused in jazz and music so much, but this is just this is a record that you don't have to be in jazz to enjoy. This could be a entry if you're not really into jazz as well. So I wanna do a shout out for this that came out this year. Another one here is this is Donald Byrd. This is live at the Half Note with Pepper Adams, Duke Pearson, Layman Jackson, and Lex Humphreys. And again, this is a cool groove record too. This is from 1960, right in there. And it's a nice session. I would say out of these four, this is my least favorite, but it's still a great session. And of course, it has the great inner sleeve that Tone Poet is famous for from the great doing a live remote there at the Half Note. It's great stuff. The great Francis Wolff photographs, of course. Donald Byrd. I am all in on Andrew Hill, and I would say in my top 5 of the Tone Poet records is Blackfire. Blackfire's Andrew Hill is an amazing record. It's a unique record from my point of view, and this is Dance with Death with Charles Tolliver, Joe Farrell, Victor Sproles, and Billy Higgins. And again, it's got your wonderful, I mean, rare in this case, color sessions. This is from 1968, and this is beautiful. This is a gorgeous record. This, doesn't have your normal melodic ballad type things. There's a lot of tension in this record, but it's not tension that makes it manic. It's kind of this great groove that mixes up time signatures, interplay between the musicians, and it's unique in that respect, I think, compared to a lot of Blue Note records, especially in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s records. There's something here going on in 1968 with Andrew Hill, and it's all over this record. Sometimes Andrew Hill gets into these other, dare I say neoclassical, it's not what I mean, but it's a little edgy without being free jazz edgy, without being, Ornette Coleman out there, Albert Ayler, that type of thing. I think this is one of the best ones in a long time of the Tone Poets, and I'm just in love with this record. Andrew Hill, Dance with Death. It's a really smart intellectual jazz record. The last thing you probably want to hear is music to be intellectual, but in a way I think it is, but it succeeds. It's in a good way. And lastly, closing out this whole long video, this smokes. This is West Coast cool jazz at its finest. The remarkable Carmel Jones featuring Harold Land. Of course, Harold Land, another LA musician on tenor, Carmel Jones on trumpet. You got Frank Strazzeri on piano, Gary Peacock on bass, and Leon Pettis on drums. And this is cool jazz at its finest. I mean, the Pacific Jazz, is this Pacific Jazz label, I believe? Yeah, Pacific Jazz, Hollywood, California. You all know it from the Chet Baker stuff. You all know it from the Art Pepper stuff. You all know it from the Shelley Mann stuff, the Andre Previn stuff. Actually, Andre Previn, was that Riverside or Prestige? I'm sorry, I'm getting my West Coast things mixed up. But this is a fantastic record. You got the groove of the opening up with this Duke Ellington tune, I'm Gonna Go Fishing, and you got the horns and syncopation kind of going into it in a cool way, almost like those noir type of cop films and cop shows of the early 1960s. This is a remarkable record. Look at this beautiful cover. Not a gatefold, which is fine by me, but what a beautiful, beautiful record. Jazz at its finest, jazz. Just great stuff coming out for Record Store Day. Some great things great records you can get in the stores now. So put your comments below if you have any questions. But again, depending on when you're watching this, coming April 11th or so, will be my conversation with Zev Feldman, and we can talk about his releases, and we'll see how they came about and what's in store for him in the future. Maybe we'll see. So thanks for watching. This jazz shit is so good. I hope you enjoy it. Mazzy loves you.